While we're kind of getting ready, I'm delighted to announce that the long-awaited St. Columba's Memorial Bell Tower was raised to our roof just a couple days back on the Feast of St. Columba. And it was a very long and exciting day. We had a huge crane here, and we took a video in time lapse that, if you'll permit me, I'll share with you this morning after our meditation. It was quite an exciting day to see this finally go up. All right, and that brings us to the hour. So welcome everyone, and as always, Benum Christ in it. I greet Christ in you and welcome you back to the Peace Chapel today. Let me go ahead and call up our reading for today. It brings us actually to the end of this section we've been reading. So a few paragraphs toward the end there, just to make it all make sense. All right. So I pulled the opening prayer from Psalm 139 today, the first 6 verses, and then the next 6 as a way of kind of opening up the readings to us this morning. So let us pray. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Amen. So our reading today continues on page 128, for those of you following in the book. And herein lies an invitation. Just to give you a little context, we were talking about that beautiful citation by Ruth Burroughs, who says that artificial adaptations of ascetical practices are not worth just the act of loving one's neighbor. That really is what asceticism boils down to, is to love one's neighbor. And so that's what I'm referring to here, this invitation. So herein lies an invitation to ascesis in the modern world, to see difficult encounters with others as invitations to embody the love of God, that we might see the face of Christ in all. It is a commitment to let go of our inner ranting, judgment, and resentment over a world that is not as we would have it. It is to learn the meaning of love and forgiveness cultivated for even the most difficult personalities. It is a summons to patiently counter egocentrism with compassion, even where truth must be told and respectful boundaries must be drawn. It is one thing to discover oneself in the context of loving relationships, but asceticism involves the more difficult practice of discovering oneself in hostile relationships. And quoting here, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same?" That's from Matthew 5:43 to 47. And let us pray. So our second reading this morning concludes this section, and you can see it on page 129 in the book. The way we think about, talk about, and greet our enemies does in fact reveal something about ourselves and the demons we harbor. There is grace even in the midst of our most hostile relationships, a grace that reveals our shadow side, our appetite for revenge or gossip and power. If we are attentive to this, we can find the sacred dimension of divine revelation about ourselves and thereby find the key to transforming these relationships into sacred encounters with self and God. One's spiritual authenticity lies in the direct correspondence between one's words and actions, and thus the interior work of prayer and ascesis must become embodied in real-world action. Solidarity with others calls for a kind of fasting from our own emotional reactivity to difficult personalities. We let go of judgment long enough to cultivate a love born of compassion for their suffering. The commitment to love one's enemies is a commitment to see Christ in them. It is a personal commitment to love them beyond the distortions of their ego, the projections of their false self, and the ravages of their own demons. It is a faith commitment that this person is first and finally beloved of God. It is an ethical commitment that requires one to admit the distortions of their own ego, the projections of their false self, and the ravages of sin in their life. It is a spiritual commitment to see the log in one's own eye before attempting to remove the speck from the eye of another. It's from Matthew 7:5. So, amen. And let us then pull that down. I certainly can call that up as needed. But as always, I just invite folks to to sit for a couple of minutes and reflect on anything that's coming up for you regarding questions or comments or reactions to the reading. Hi, good morning, Nicola.
So this is amazing and miraculous, but I've been struggling with some facts I've learned about my daughter and how she feels about things and how angry she is with me. And to come across these readings this morning, you know, all my life when I have been in difficult relationships, I have a go-to, which is just to leave the relationship, which of course, when you have children, you can't do that. And so I suppose it is the perfect test for looking at these kind of problems and the demons within oneself. So I am just so grateful this morning because I was so in such turmoil. I felt like such a hypocrite, you know, that, oh, I have these spiritual pursuits, and yet I have all this negativity in my relationship with my own daughter. And, you know, what's the truth in this kind of thing, black and white? So this is just very helpful for me this morning to realize that this is a gift, perhaps the final gift in terms of relationships, that, you know, there's no escaping this. I have to work with this and have forgiveness for us both within it. And it's just, I'm just grateful. Thank you.
Nicholas, thank you for sharing that. And if you don't mind, I just want to follow with a question, and no need to answer. This is the wrong venue for that. But do you have a sense that on both of your parts, there is a willingness to move to something that would resemble, reconciliation, forgiveness, or does it feel stuck, or the past is the past and I can't get, from your daughter's side, I can't get beyond it?
Well, I don't know how to answer it in terms of not making it personal, but I don't even feel the need for there to be a reconciliation necessarily at this point. I just feel a need to examine this for the self-examination and see this as such an opportunity to work on my own demons within that relationship.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. Well, we'll keep you in prayer on that. It's a beautiful recognition. Yeah. Thank you. And good morning, Lucy. Yeah, you just want to make sure you unmute there.
Good morning, Father Vincent and everybody. Well, last week's reading was just apropos. It was perfect timing. And today's could not be even more. It's yes, I'm conscious that what is written is what I need to do, and that's what I want to do. But in the relationship with my father, who's now 87, and he's aging really badly. And he lives in one of those elders' private home. And then because of the pandemic, it was really difficult. And he's always criticizing, and he's like, he does that, and it just gets to me, and I just can't. It's beyond me. I can't help it. I hang up on him. It's just too much for me. I can't handle it. It's just, I'm trying really hard. I'm like, I'm going to see him today, and I'm thinking, yes, I'm going to try to have all the love of God that I can, and know that I can't change him. I'm accepting his personality. He's got all these defaults of a high-ranked military officer, and it's like he needs to control everything, and he can't now. And has cognitive, also problems now. And I wish I could be so loving like my mother. It's in her nature. She was able to stand him, but I can't. I just can't. Is it a question of personality? I need help. I need tricks. I need something that, please, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. First of all, it's sad because for somebody whose go-to in life was control, and to be losing that is terrifying. We all have the places we go when we feel insecure or in need of a place, something for identity. And of course, those who are in the military understand how much, and even frankly, like religious orders, it's a lot about control, controlling the day, controlling my thoughts, controlling my feelings, controlling other people. There's like a lot of there. So when that safety of go-to is just because of one's age and body and mental state is diminishing, that's absolutely terrifying because he doesn't know his identity beyond that. So no doubt there's going to be rage and anger and really a grasping to regain that control, which of course will never happen. There was something you said, just about, how sometimes you feel like you can't take it, and it really you feel very reactive to this place he gets into. I can appreciate that in relationships I've had in my own life, where you really feel triggered by somebody's persistent incapacity to get beyond sort of themselves or beyond their most basic knee-jerk reactions to life and so forth. I don't know if it's a trick, but it's a technique or a method that I use sometimes, is really just to, in a sense, disengage my own ego when I'm with, an individual like that by going literally, you know how John Kabat-Zinn talks about inhabiting your body, where you can actually consciously go into a part of your body, like your toe. He does this as a method of body relaxation, where you consciously think about your toes and relax them, your feet, your ankles. You keep moving up your whole body until everything's relaxed. And what I've done in situations like this is consciously inhabit my heart space. So I just almost like withdraw consciously into my inner self. And I focus my energy around my heart, in a sense of just how I concentrate on where I'm at in my body, and bring to mind, almost like a shield, my prayer word, or the Jesus prayer for me. And I just keep doing that. So what that gives me the capacity to do is to treat the offending personality like a thought that rises in meditation, which is to say, I recognize it, I see it. I'm not going to build reactive narratives around it, or thoughts of, what would normally be retaliatory or screaming back, or just engaging in whatever way is trying to shut that down. To recognize, like my own thoughts that come up, this person's tirade or whatever is beyond my control. And by not focusing on the emotions being raised in me through this tirade, which can really feel toxic, I'm going to sort of withdraw into that hermitage of my heart and pray the Jesus prayer in this case, and just let those things flow through me. And the effect that I have found is almost identical to how I'm impacted by doing that very same technique or method or approach to prayer when I have persistent thoughts, because it gives your both your mind and your heart something else to do when the overwhelming temptation is to get my ego engaged and shout back or scream at them or walk away or insult them, or whatever that amounts to, that really becomes turbulent. It's allowing me to be present to whatever that is without being attached to the toxicity of it. And that's what I have found, honestly, to be. And sometimes it's takes a tremendous amount of energy, love, patience, to kind of move into that heart place and to focus there instead of on the words, and just let them go through you.
Well, I totally get that and agree with it, but I think you are a saint. Pardon?
I could feel the butt coming.
Yes, you are a saint because you are able to do that. It's just that I can't think of doing that in the spur of the moment. It's just, that's the thing. I cannot think of bringing myself back to my heart or.
Well, one thing I would encourage you to do and here's the ascetical practice. Before you get to your dad's house today, anticipate he's going to go there again. Like, consciously, mentally prepare yourself that today's not going to be different than last time. He is probably losing some of his mental integrity and so forth, right? So all of those things are at play here. His declining health, his declining mental health, his capacity to probably filter, is if he ever had one, is certainly diminishing, and so on. And so if you sort of spiritually prepare yourself, what I want you to pay attention to in the moment is not what he's saying or doing, but to prepare yourself for what begins to come up in you when he says or does that thing. In other words, notice what begins to arise in you when you start getting triggered, so that when that feeling begins to emerge later, you catch it early before it balloons into something out of control, and say, oh, that, Lucy, is something you absolutely can have. If you want to say mind over matter or heart over matter, you can do it. It does take practice, and you need to be very forgiving of yourself when you find it's just too much sometimes and you kind of lose it, right? You go off the rails. This is, we've all been there. I've been there. So, so in a sense, if you prepare yourself spiritually by saying, I know he's going to do X, Y, and Z, allow yourself to begin to feel how you start to feel triggered. And then when that triggering point happens, that's the moment to consciously enter into that heart space. and allow yourself permission to struggle many, many times with only mediocre results until you hone the skill, because it is a spiritual skill, and it's a skill of compassion.
Well, I certainly know that the challenge is great, but the reward, if I'm able to do that, will be the greatest. And if I can go through that with my dad, I will be able to go through it with anybody after that.
Yeah, it's been said that nobody knows how to push your buttons than like the people who made them. So it's no wonder that our parents tend to trigger us sometimes, because you have that long-standing relationship. So there is, remember, Lucy, you're not just up against the moment that your dad is on a tirade, or you're up against a history of probably resentment that has built over who he is and his controlling nature, and all the things that you have dealt with over the years that have been hurtful or painful or traumatic. So all of that emotional, psychological weight is very much behind whatever you're going to experience in him today. And part of the practice of love and compassion is to free both of you from that history, by turning to be focused in the present moment, and rather than allowing the sort of cumulative weight of that history to trigger you beyond the point that you can respond compassionately. And if you need to step out, take a few breaths, and if you totally go off the rails, just know that that's part of you learning. And then comes the practice of self-compassion. So don't get down on yourself.
Thank you so much. These sessions are fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, and thank you for sharing this morning. Hi, Nora. Good morning.
Father, how are you, everybody? I'm so glad to be able to be back. This may sound simplistic, but I in my meditation, it occurred to me that all of this is really based on empathy. And my empathy comes from my acceptance of God's love for me, really accepting that. And that gives me the grace to be empathetic toward another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking how easy it is for me to see a homeless person and feel the great empathy because of the lack of the fulfillment of their physical needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I encounter a difficult person, I need to think about the lack of spiritual shelter that these people often have, that I can recognize in me, that I can go to. It's my go-to, it's my shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And people with no spiritual shelter and facing what we're facing in this world today are frenzied and broken, shelterless souls, really. Just like the physically homeless people. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So if I think of them as shelterless, shall we say, they don't have a place to go for spiritual grace, and they're floundering many times, and the floundering is exacerbated by the conditions the litany of doom that we hear every day. And so it comes to me that empathy for the shelterless in spirit and in body is my key to feeling the love that needs to be felt.
Thank you, Nora. Yeah, this is what much of what Father Thomas Keating wrote about was really understanding sort of the depth of the Christian contemplative tradition through the lens of psychology and really understanding the like afflictive needs that he talked about, and his whole little pamphlet. One of my favorite things he's ever published is his pamphlet on the human condition. I mean, you could read it in 20 minutes. It's a tiny little, it's almost like just stapled together, but it really just forms the basis, I think, for his. And I say this in a positive sense, his psychologizing of the spiritual process, by which we could understand much of what's going on within us spiritually through many of the modern categories of psychology that we've only developed, in recent centuries. And so what you're speaking to of, sort of the emotionally or spiritually homeless, I think is what he's calling those who struggle with afflictive emotions, or what I'm calling in this chapter, demons and so forth. And it's what I say in these final paragraphs of, can we look lovingly at an individual even beyond the ravaging of their own demons? This is sometimes very difficult, but it gives us the capacity to separate their uniqueness, their beauty as individual people, despite the ravages of being spiritually homeless, to use your terms. Yeah, but yes, that's one of the only places that I find meaningful to go to when I'm finding myself reactive toward a really hostile or toxic person, is to say, how much suffering must there be going on for them to be? And there really is. It's not just like language that makes us feel better who are trying to cope with them, but really a person who is that miserable can't possibly be happy. And what must that be like every day to live in that misery? It does evoke some degree of compassion, to be sure, certainly in me. It's a starting point. Yeah. So thank you, Nora, for that. Good morning, Marcia.
Good morning, Father. I'm so nervous to speak because this is only my second time to do it.
That's all right. You're among a friendly crowd here.
Oh, and the first time was such a stupid question. I asked you about, you were showing a picture and I said, were those the 3 snakes in the Garden of Eden? And you said, no, those were 3 rivers coming out from underneath.
It was a bad painting, Marcia, but not your fault.
So anyway, this psalm, I appreciate everything you've been doing for all of us, but you're breaking me down inside and filling me with compassion. And this Psalm 139 has always been my favorite. And I have learned to deal with difficult bosses and difficult neighbors. But there's one relationship with my sister that I can't figure out what to do, because she is like my dad, a controlling, manipulating person. And the words that you said today, that we have to have compassion for their suffering, I just wrote down, she doesn't have any suffering. She's always lording it over me. And I can't even think that she has suffering. But as I listen to Lucy and Nora, she is a miserable person, and she is so mean to everybody. And I think she must be suffering with that. That's why she can't heal herself, because she's just so miserable. And the way she controls me, even though she's the younger sister, she deprives me of all family information. We live in California and they live in Pennsylvania. So anything that happens, I don't know unless some person who's on vacation or somebody finds out something and they tell me. Well, this year, her husband died. She didn't even tell me. A person in South Carolina saw it in the newspaper and told me, oh, her husband died. Well, I was so upset, but that's her way of controlling me. She doesn't let me in on any of the family stuff. And so I sent her a card, and I had a mass said, and I had, made a donation to their charity. Nothing. I called on the phone. I could hear the phone pick up, say, hello. Then I spoke. Then the phone went down. So there's just no communication, no love, it's all suffering. So can you offer anything there? How to break through this shell of hatred? Thank you.
You know, one of the things that I think most of us at this point in our lives have realized is that there's many people with whom we share a blood relationship, but without which we would not probably have any reason to extend interest in friendship or any kind of intimate relationship. There's just nothing there but blood, but we share some DNA. And in many ways, coming out of an East Coast Italian family, I didn't realize really the role that family loyalty kind of played into our family dynamic. That there's this, frankly, this is where the mafia gets it from. It's all about loyalty to the Godfather and all that, there's something to be said, but that builds on, I think, a more broadly cultural Italian kind of sense of loyalty to family. And over the course of my life, to be honest with you, that cultural influence has sort of worn down in me, because as a fully bona fide American at this point, that doesn't quite have the same cultural hold. And I don't see a reason why it necessarily should. And that's different than, so it is a strange phenomenon that we are forced, our families are kind of forced on us on some level, and with whom we may share absolutely no common interests, no common worldviews, no ideologies, no commitments to ethics or religion or anything like that, but for the fact that we share a bloodline. And I just want to, in some sense, it's been my experience not to take family lightly or dismissively, but to understand that there are some family members with whom I just simply don't share any interests, and to just let it go. If there is that kind of divisiveness and animosity, if this, for example, were just some neighbor you used to know in Pennsylvania, how hard would you be trying to repair this relationship if they had this kind of hostility? And I know to some that might seem scandalous to be that dismissive of family or siblings, but at some point, I think it's healthier, and I kind of allude to this in the paragraphs today, to simply allow a boundary to be there that sort of protects you from that toxicity. There should be no genetic obligation on your part to subject yourself to a hostile or hateful person. But you can create that boundary, but leave it porous should the time come that the other person wants to reconsider something more life-giving and compassionate and respectful and dignified. So I've reached a point in my life where I don't want to be dismissed. I don't want to see my family commitments or relationships break down, but I don't see them in the same sense of enculturated loyalty that I think I thought of them in my earlier life. And therefore, where natural relationships arise, whether it's family or not, feed those and nurture those. But if you're up against that kind of hostility, I think sometimes the most compassionate thing to do is to close the door, but don't lock it.
Mm-hmm.
And when your sister has done the inner work that is necessary, clearly from your description anyway, that she needs to do, and reaches out, you can open that door with a compassionate heart and a hope for something that's more authentic and based on love rather than blood. And I think that is a much richer possibility. And, the harsh thing would be, what I wouldn't encourage you to do is to close the door and bolt it shut. So you always want to leave open that possibility. But if they're not doing their inner work, in some ways, the deeper and deeper isolation that people who are in those places lead them to could potentially have the effect of finally saying, wait a minute, how did I end up this alone? Where are my siblings? Where are my friends? Why am I? And that could be the very catalyst for reconsidering their own life commitments and their own way of being. So I would say hold an open heart, but don't be afraid to create a boundary. You don't have to subject yourself to that.
Thank you for giving me that freedom.
Yeah. And just keep holding that love in prayer for her in the meantime and
Oh,
see.
I pray for her every day.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
hope it's a little, yeah, you're welcome, Marsha.
And guess what? You know I'm from the East. And now I'm Italian.
So you know that loyalty. That's yep. So I thought I picked up on that. So there you go.
With 2 zingers.
That's right.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Thank you, Marsha. Hi there, Sue.
Hi. There's many things that I feel I'd like to share, but it would probably feel too much. But the image that really struck me in the prayer time was if I know someone, what came to me was, say I know someone, say there's a best friend, and they just happen to be dressed up in a suit as a monkey, for instance, or as a witch. And if I choose to then relate to them, if I forget who they are and I'm just relating to them as a monkey or a witch, then it's not relating in truth. And the teachings of A Course in Miracles cause you to see beyond, don't make the error real. So basically I'm making the monkey real or the witch real. But I'm encouraged with the help of the Holy Spirit to see through that illusion that I'm creating, that I'm seeing, and remember the truth that they are the Christ, that they are the child of God, as am I. And so that image helped me to sort of look at how I might be doing that in my life. And it's sort of, I find images work for me better than words, clever words, or words that feel a bit, how's that going to work then? But I love it because it feels related also to what we're called to do, like in the Book of Common Prayer, to seek and serve Christ in all. And I think for me, it's so easy to get caught up in the other person, what I think's wrong with them. And really, again, it feels quite radical, but in the Course in Miracles, we're called to see them as my savior. So the person who's triggering me the most, I get triggered, and it shows me what I'm still believing. It shows me that I've forgotten the truth of who we all are. And it shows me that I'm using relationships often for guilt, like an addiction to guilt, because it's so easy to then beat myself up for having been a spiritual failure or not a saint, or, and I think it's so important to keep praying for me so much more and more and more, because it's ultimately not me that's going to make this better. It's going to be the Spirit of Christ coming through me when I allow that, when I can receive it, when I can accept that that's part of my being, that is my whole being, actually. So there's so many other things, but I just felt to say that. I don't know.
Thank you. So yeah, and I love the costume analogy, the monkey or the witch. I mean, in many ways, it really is a simple metaphor for what really is getting engaged. It's two different people's costumes engaging one another with the reality, something much deeper behind them. And I think part of the illusion is not only when I forget that that's not really a witch, not really a monkey, but when the person wearing the costume forgets, I'm not really a witch, I'm not really a monkey, and engages the world through that identity themselves. And so the attachment to ego can kind of be from the inside out, right? Where my costume in the world becomes something of a false identity, versus then everybody engaging that costume as if it were the truth as well. And this really is the grand illusion that we are constantly in the spiritual life seeking to set aside and set aside and set aside. And as you say, when you engage the monkey and the witch, it's an invitation to remember you're engaging a costume and not the depth. But that's a constant practice we have to come back to.
Yes. And if I might just offer a practical prayer, it's sort of like after the event prayer, but I feel it's beautiful. So it's along the lines of, Holy Spirit, help me to forgive myself for using, say, my mother, because I had a difficult relationship with her. So Holy Spirit, help me to forgive myself for using my mother to attack myself and keep myself separate from love's presence. Because when I'm in conflict, basically it's because I'm in conflict in myself. I feel guilty, I attack myself. And when I'm stuck in that illusion and forgotten that I am love, then I'm separating myself. I'm putting a veil, I'm like a wall up, and I'm using relationships just to attack myself and keep making myself feel guilty. Whereas relationships can be used to really wake up and see with Christ's vision. And so I feel we have a choice of what we want to use relationships for.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
This beautiful prayer. Thank you, Sue. Okay, that brings us to just past the hour. And I'm wondering if there's anyone who would like to still share a thought about the readings or a response or a life experience. Otherwise, maybe I'll show you a quick video of our of the time lapse of the raising of our bell tower, and then move to a discussion on practice. But I don't want to cut anybody off if there's something on the cusp of something you'd like to say. All right, let me see then if you'll indulge me. It was actually quite an exciting day. So this is just a minute or so, because we time lapsed the whole day. So there's our roof as we begin. Right up here is where you'll see there's the artist and the platforms he made. So here we go. So it just rings from there. So anyway, that was it's quite a beautiful piece, and the bell sounds wonderful. So this morning at 9 o'clock will be the first time we'll hear it ringing for Angelus, which took me forever to figure out how to program that, and so forth. So it was very exciting. We had a lovely day here, and it's been a long time in the coming. The pictures don't do it justice. It's an absolutely beautiful tower. And cross. So come visit and you'll get to see it for real. All right. So let me call up then what was essentially our practice for last week. Or instead, I'll tell you what, let me share what we've got going on this week. And then we can talk about if you have anything to share. So for this week, and based on the comments I heard, this hopefully will have some relevance. Reflect on a relationship in which there was a long-standing disagreement or grievance. What would it take to move from forgiveness to reconciliation? I'm sorry, I have a word missing there. So what would it take to move from forgiveness to reconciliation? And where reconciliation is not possible at this time, what does forgiveness feel like? You'll notice my emphasis there on feel. I'm trying to ask in this particular meditation that you consider moving into the feelings that are evoked in response to this individual, rather than the thoughts, and see if that's not a more fruitful starting place. All right. For this week, June 4th. So what I had you do was sit with the desire to be more loving and see what arises. And the questions that I pose are: more loving to whom, in what way? And then I invited you to give that a try. So the desire to be more loving, what arises in you when you sit with that desire? Is there someone in particular that comes to mind, and what would it look like to be more loving toward them? So if there's any thoughts about that, I'm happy to give you a moment to think that through. So Richard or Paloma just asked briefly the symbolism on the bell tower. I'm certainly happy to address that. We'll be doing that in more detail. In fact, my sermon last Sunday went into some length, and that's available online if you'd like to get that off our website. But it's essentially the idea is that the bell tower is made up of Celtic knotwork, roots and vines. The roots extending into the roof of the church, in a sense, right over the altar, so being fed by word and sacrament. And the bell tower is called a tree of life. And so the idea is the cross as the tree of life extends its roots into the believing community and both nourishes and grows out of that. And within that sort of knotwork, which kind of evolves into vines, it evokes Jesus's teachings. I am the vine, you are the branches. You see there my love for that piece around deification. And there has been inlaid, that's all copper. So those panels are not painted. Those are patinaed copper. And you'll see that if you look closely that there's leaves embedded in the patina process that were real leaves he used. And that is the idea that the sacredness through the incarnation and embraces all of creation. So we've tried to highlight the sacredness of creation, if you want to say an ecological theme in that. At the bottom of the cross is a crown, stands for Christus Victor, that Christ is victorious as high priest and king on the cross. And within the center of the cross itself is a reliquarium that's holding the ashes of loved ones to whom this tower was built, and based on basically our major donors and contributors. So it's got a beautiful history there. Yeah. That's our sort of a quick lowdown of those symbols. So any thoughts then on the practice for this week, or are we good? Yeah, Mary Sue, please go right ahead.
Thank you for describing the bell tower. That's beautiful.
Sure.
When I think about the call to be more loving, I am so aware that the first person I need to be more loving to is myself.
Yeah.
Because and I learned that not only in spiritual practice, but in 12-step runs, that I have to start with myself. And if I can't be more loving to myself and compassionate to myself and understanding and forgiving and accepting, I can't do that for anyone else. And really, that's been a big part of my practice over the last several years, is learning how to do that. So anyway, that's my experience, is that oftentimes the person that I am the hardest on is myself.
And I think, Mary Sue, that, I don't want to say this with too much judgment on the church, but I do think it needs to be looked at, that in many ways, that feeling of the fact that's something we have to arrive at rather than just understand sort of as a matter of spiritual teaching coming out of our church, for example, is a little bit problematic, because I feel like what we oftentimes hear from the pulpit is, what I summarize as behavior modification. So you should love your neighbor, you should forgive your enemy, you should do this, and you need to do that. But rarely do we hear, what are the resources at my disposal to actually make this authentic? And so that it's how do I start with showing some mercy on myself, showing some compassion, showing some sense of forgiveness for my own foibles. And by that, I don't mean a kind of dismissive, like, well, I'm going to let myself off the hook kind of spiritual approach. But in order to show mercy, compassion, forgiveness on oneself, you really have to look at how at times, you've kind of been, hypocritical and kind of short-sighted and egotistical, and really requires the work of not just being dismissive about my own capacity to harm, to hurt, right? To be hypocritical, but to examine that and then to be able to really move to a place of forgiveness. And it's from that truly that forgiveness towards others extend, because you understand when you're judging someone else for being hypocritical, you've done the work to say, yeah, I've done that. That's me. And part of my reactivity is something in them I'm recognizing in myself, and I'm just not dealing with that. So the real spiritual work is not to just dismiss my own capacity for hurting people, but to examine it deeply and closely, to find the forgiveness and compassion of God in that, and then to understand and live in that awareness, which then gives me the joy and the gratitude and the spiritual capacity to be, it's the whole what I said in today from Matthew's gospel. It's the whole log and the speck idea. And it's looking at that log so that the speck becomes a much lighter spiritual practice to forgive. It's unfortunate that just isn't the message we get from really, really small. It's more about do this and do that and don't do this and don't do that, but nothing about what's going on interiorly around what's motivating me to do or not do those things. How is that coming out of a place of love or an experience of God's mercy that I want to pass to someone else? And so that the church needs to do better at that, I think.
And I agree. I think that's why I found, the fourth and fifth step, that sense of really doing that interior work, is totally transformational, because now I can look at someone, and this goes back to something that was talked about earlier today, and really see that all of this behavior is coming out of a very, very broken person.
Mm-hmm.
And I can look at the brokenness and have some compassion. It may drive me crazy, but I can be kind and compassionate, because I know that it's coming from brokenness.
Right.
Yeah. And remembering too that my responsibility is taking care of my peace. I have no control over anybody else's response or behavior, but I certainly have control over how I choose to respond or be present in a situation. And
that's, Mary Sue, exactly why I have found in exploring what does a modern asceticism look like, which has been, the basic focus of this entire chapter, is to see, and precisely in that sense of lack of control is where meditative practice, which I don't think of as an asceticism in itself, but what it shares with asceticism is the lack of control. Interiorly in prayer, I can't control my thoughts. I can't control the emotions that arise. I can't control the feelings I often associate with those thoughts, those anxieties about the future, regrets about the past, blah, blah, blah. It's all about looking at what arises in me beyond my control and what I do with that, which is return to the silence. And just as we were talking earlier with Marcia, the practice of asceticism is, again, dealing with what I cannot control, right? Someone else's personality, someone else's brokenness, someone else's behavior, and doing the same thing I do in prayer, coming back to the heart center, coming back to the prayer word, and so on. So in many ways, this is why I call asceticism a contemplative practice or prayer turned inside out, because it's really, we're doing the same thing. Right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Sue. Very good. Any other thoughts then, or questions this morning? Yeah, hi, Nora. Nora, you just want to go ahead and unmute there.
I just want to say that you asked how it feels, and it feels good when you've reacted with love instead of hostility. It feels so right. It feels like you've honored the connection that there is between all of us. When you've done it, let's put it that way.
Right.
When you've done it right.
Yes, you do. It's a grace moment. Yes. Right. Indeed. Thank you. Thanks, Nora. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. What for me is this morning. And I hope you have a beautiful and lovely week ahead. Just remember, as you attempt to put all these things into practice, to really do be merciful with yourselves as you find yourself doing these things quite imperfectly, sporadically, and with mixed results, if you want to call it that. Just keep taking one step at a time, and you'll get there. Each one of these failures teaches us something about what to do the next time. So just see it as all part of the practice. It's good work you're doing, and difficult. All right. So as you go throughout the week, as always, go with my blessing in the name of the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. And I look forward to seeing you when we're back this coming Saturday, if not sooner. All right. God bless you now.